weekly commentaries on the Bible and the Bhagavad Gita, written by Swami Kriyananda based on the teachings of Paramhansa Yogananda. This week's reading is entitled, The Divine Ascension. Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. In the Gospel of St. John, we read, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man cometh unto the Father but by me. What is this light? What is this I, when spoken by a master who has conquered every vestige of ego consciousness? Therein lies the mystery of the scriptural teaching, that I that is no I. Does it even exist? In what way is it different from the consciousness that animates other human beings? Jesus was not saying, look at me, don't look at other masters. He was saying rather, look at the divine self that is the essence of who you are, your very self. You are that I. No man cometh unto the divine consciousness except by first recognizing his own intrinsic divinity, hidden behind his delusive ego. The Bhagavad Gita in the 4th chapter states, O son of Pritha, Arjuna, representing every devotee, in whatever way people accept me, in that way do I appear to them. For all men in some way pursue the path to me. Meditate on the divine incarnations. Their lives and their consciousness animating them will be your stairway to the infinite. Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. So I hope you could hear that reading all right. I always feel like I'm talking through a pillow. I'm trying to read that. I am the way, the truth, and the life. This reading is saying, is not Jesus saying, I'm the best one and follow me, and don't pay any attention to any of those other teachers or masters. He's saying follow the truth, and that truth is one and eternal. That truth is the essence of the universe. And we have to realize, as this reading is saying, that the scriptures hold a great mystery. It's not as though we just can open them and, okay, go down to the next street and turn right. It's not specific directions for our life unless we open our hearts to them. And then the scriptures speak to us. So that mystery of God being the doer in all things is something that we have to ponder until we realize it in our own selves. That's the essence of the spiritual path, is realizing that God is animating our lives. God dreamed this universe. As Sri Yukteswar said, each of us, what is the self? He said the definition of the self is an idea resting on a fragment of spiritual light. That's who we really are. We think we are this body, these feelings, these experiences, these thoughts, this mind, the degree we have, the skills that we have. That is a bundle of self-definitions, as Swami Kriyananda would say. We are not any of those things. There was a great devotee of Yogananda, Kamala Silver, who wrote some beautiful books about her time with Master. The Flawless Mirror is one of them. If you can ever read that, it's very beautiful. But as she aged, she got dementia or Alzheimer's, and some of the people at Ananda helped to care for her. And at one point, one of them said to Swami, "It's such a great pity that this wonderful devotee doesn't have the full capacity of her mind anymore." And Swami's response was, "It's just the mind. That doesn't matter. It's the soul that matters." She didn't lose anything in her soul. So we have to realize that divinity within us. And there's a classic story that Swami would often tell about a guru in India who gave a piece of fruit to every one of his devotees, his disciples. And he said to them, "Now take this fruit that I've given you and go out into the forest and find a place where no one can see you, and then eat this fruit." So they went out, and he said, "Then come back as soon as you have eaten your fruit, then come back." So at the end of the day, all the disciples had come back except for one. And the other disciples were getting worried about them, and finally, just at dark, this last disciple came back. And he bowed at the Guru's feet and he said, "Master, I'm sorry, but here's the fruit. I could never find a place where those eyes were not looking at me." And the Guru said, "My son, you have understood. Those divine eyes are always watching, always looking, always trying to lift us up." The word karma has kind of a bad name these days. We tend to think of, "Oh, my karma is squashing me. It's putting me through the paces." It's all these different ways of thinking of it. But the best way to think of karma is the loving hand of God coaxing us to move in the right direction, to follow the way of the higher self. Swami very consciously paired this week's reading with the affirmation high-mindedness, because that is what we need to focus on. Let it be what we focus on in the new year, to try to keep our minds elevated, to always think in terms of the highest that we can be, the highest that we can achieve, the highest thoughts we can have. Let's not live anymore in hopelessness, despair, worry, fear, all those sorts of negative feelings. Let's have hope. Let's live in the trust that God will take care of us. I mentioned this to some friends on Christmas Day, but I wanted to say it again more broadly to everyone. I came across a little saying of Yogananda's that I hadn't heard before. It's very sweet and simple, but it had a deep meaning for me. And he says simply, and I better read it so I have it exact. Live quietly in the moment and see the beauty of all before you. The future will take care of itself. So let's live in that. Live at peace. Live quietly in the moment. Don't let the craziness of the world get to you. When I was a little child, maybe 6 years old, something like that, my mother was lamenting to me all the things that were happening in the world. You know, it was the Cold War, there was fear of Russia, people were building bomb shelters, all that sort of thing. It was very agitated. And she was lamenting, oh, there's never been a more terrible time on earth. And from the depths of my little soul, I don't know who I thought I was to say this to my mother, but it came out of my mouth, Mom, it's always been like this. I don't know how I knew that, but now I know that it's true. It's always been like this. And saints have come out of every age. So let us become a saint. That's our destiny. And what does that mean? It means to live in truth, live in trust, to do all the things that we know are the right things, and to actually do them. Not to waffle out, not to say, oh, later, like St. Augustine said, Lord, make me good, but not too soon. Now's the time. Let us become good and keep our minds elevated. St. Paul, in one of his epistles, said, fix your mind on that which is true. And I'll paraphrase because I don't have it in front of me. But he said, think about things that are noble, that are beautiful, that are righteous. Fill your mind with those thoughts. And let us do that. Let us purify ourselves and become godly in this new year. And if we ever wanted to do anything to help this world and the consciousness that we see around us, that's the way to do it. Not by preaching and telling people where they're going wrong, but by being in that quiet, living quietly, living peacefully, and elevating our thoughts to contemplate the lives of the saints, as this reading says. That's our stairway to self-realization, to happiness, to the bliss of realizing God within our own souls.
The very first book that Yoganandaji published in this country was called The Science of Religion. And Swamiji worked on that book because it had been edited rather heavily by a disciple of Yogananda who spoke better English than Yogananda did at the time. But his consciousness was a little bit heavy, and so the book itself comes out a little heavy. The language is a little bit ponderous, and it didn't entirely reflect Yogananda's spirit. So Swamiji worked through all the thoughts in the book, but expressed them in a more sort of easy to get hold of way, and titled the book, God is for Everyone. And the meaning of that touches on part of our reading today, which is the Bhagavad Gita is saying in whatever way people accept me, God speaking to each devotee, each soul really, that's the way that I come to them. And that's the spirit of the book, God is for everyone. Basically saying everyone is on the path. Now, they may not know it. They may be racing hard backwards in the wrong direction. But they're still racing towards God because they think they're going to find fulfillment going in the wrong direction. And so, after crashing and burning a few times, they will probably figure out, oh, okay, well, maybe I didn't want to go that way. Bad world, bad universe. No, the universe is quite fine. It's just, if you bash your head against the wall. I many years ago, I read a lovely book on astrology when I was studying astrology. This is back in the 90s. And one of the points that this author was making was expressed in such a lovely way that I've always remembered it. She said, you cannot break a divine law, but you have the privilege, based on free will, to smash your head up against it enough times that you figure out that you can break your own neck trying. And that's not, of course, what we want to do. We want to, as Nirmala is saying, abide by the law of karma, not because, the universe is wagging its finger at us. I remember the frustration with which my mother would try to explain this point to me as a child growing up and as an adolescent, a pretty rebellious adolescent, I will add. And I think I can see her shaking her head. It was like, if you just get your homework done on Friday night, you have the whole weekend, basically, and which is what my twin sister always did. And I would always save mine until at least Sunday night, and often Monday morning early, and meanwhile, the weight of it was, sort of looming overhead the whole time. Or just, sort of doing really stupid things that left a big mess everywhere, and then, you have to clean it up, and you have to deal with the vibes of others who didn't appreciate having a big mess left around, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, all the things that, the follies of youth. Unfortunately, there's a lot of youth in this world that hasn't even walking around in rather elderly bodies that haven't figured that out. And we don't have to get drawn into that drama ourselves. The world is going to go on in its own way. People are going to develop from their own center, their own perception of reality. I had this thought, and I shared a little of it in the purification ceremony, but I'll just expand on this. Every person comes from his or her own center. And that is the center of the universe as far as each one is concerned. And if you think of this in terms of particle physics or just astronomy, the image that I shared was we have these various probes, satellites that are heading off into space. Some of them are revolving around planets. One of them's going around Jupiter. Another one's been going around Saturn. And, two of them, the Voyager probes, left the solar system some years ago and are now out in interstellar space. And what time is it on one of those probes? I mean, there's kind of no time out there. They're not really in the orbit of days and nights of the world, or 365 days that it takes to go around the sun one loop, or even, out there, Pluto, takes 248 years to make it around once. I mean, they're way out past all of that. It's like, well, what time is it? Who's moving where relative to what? Relative to the probe, everything else is moving. The probe is standing still as far as it's concerned. It's just that it's kind of smaller than most of the other stuff that's out there, the big planets and asteroids and so on. But all of us, in our own nature, are actually in stillness. And it's the rest of the world that's moving around us, showing us this wild, amazing drama, this incredible adventure movie, disaster movie, horror movie, tragedy, romance, whatever story you want to tell. However that plays out in your awareness, it plays out meaningfully, because however we approach God is how God comes to us. Anandamayi Ma, a wonderful woman saint in India, described this as, I am a drum, and however you play me, that's how I sound. Play me with joy, I sound joyful. Play me with anger or frustration, I sound angry or frustrated. But I am the drum. How will we drum? How will we play? How will we play in the new year that's coming? In a way that little hairline that divides 2021 and 2022 is just it's a little imaginary mark out there. The Earth is going around the sun, and at a certain moment, when our time zone comes up, it's so interesting. Time zones didn't even exist until trains became, prominently used. And then it was like, because everybody just figured, okay, well, noon is when the sun is overhead. And if noon is, 15 minutes or a half hour or an hour earlier for us than it is for somebody else, well, who cares, because our reality doesn't go beyond the neighborhoods and the, 50 miles, 100 miles away. Well, then when you had trains departing at a certain moment, well, you had to kind of coordinate, what time is it here? What time is it there? Well, what time is it in God? It's joy. That's the time in God. It's called joy. It's called love. It's called peace. It's called wisdom. It's called whatever you want it to be called. Let's live in that time. Let's go to that time zone. We've been in all kinds of other time zones. We've been racing around the planet for years and incarnations. And let us now, as Nirmala was saying, find the truth that lives inside of us. I used to really struggle with this, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man cometh to the Father but by me. I remember as a kid growing up in the Christian tradition, reading in the newspaper once, or reading in some magazine or something, of an Indian saint who was coming to this country, who was a boy. He was, 12, 14 years old, but he was revered as a divine incarnation. And he was the master of the world. I mean, all this glowing language was attributed to him, and it just offended me. It was just like, no, 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 no. Jesus was the way, the truth, and the light. It was just like I had already paid my subscription. It was already going down this other trail. And then, living in India for 9 years or so kind of changes your perspective, and you start to realize divine vision is center everywhere, circumference nowhere. God is truth, yes, and that truth lives in every single person, not just every single person, every single particle of the universe is endowed with that truth. Now, it takes awareness, it takes perception, it takes realization to fully express that truth. But the truth itself is there living. And if we would know that truth, then we have to approach it in our own unique ways. But I love that the affirmation high-mindedness, as Nirmala was saying, is paired with this reading, because it gives us a clue, it gives us a hint. We have to live in that high state and just let it become our own nature, because then we're not drawn down into the dramas and the cynicism of this world. It's very easy. It's very easy and low energy to be cynical in this world. It's kind of the easiest thing in the world. You know, you watch late night TV, which I cannot say that I've done in a long, long time, but I'm aware of late night TV, and it's almost universally about cynicism and, humor at someone else's expense. Let us have humor. If need be. Oh, sorry guys. Here, turn me off for a second. Should be better. To have humor at our own expense is better than at somebody else's expense. But just to simply have the perspective to see joy in the circumstances of life, to appreciate the bizarreness of the drama. I was reading about these 4 guys who spent they spent 28 days in the bottom of the Mediterranean doing these diving expeditions. This is a National Geographic article that just came out recently. And when they were done with their dives each day, they never came back up to the surface. That's partly how they could do this. They could spend hours and hours on these dives. And then they came back to a little diving bell, and you saw a picture of them. And I mean, they are literally like sardines in a can. They spent a month like this. They said, it was suffering being inside that thing because there was no space. And, but once they were diving, they were free. And they could explore, and they could tune in to, take these amazing pictures. And basically, they were looking at a world that nobody's ever seen. They said in some ways the moon is better explored than the bottom of our own ocean, the bottom of our own Mediterranean. Anyway, there was this picture of these 2 little, I don't even know what you'd call them. They weren't fishes and they weren't eels. They were something in between. But anyway, they were mating, but they were saying that modesty impelled them to, go off where it was private. And I was thinking, modesty, huh? Maybe survival, maybe, maybe there were other implications involved. But the uniqueness, the wonder, I so appreciated the way these guys wrote, because it was just, they were like little kids, and they got to spend 28 days down there. And when they, how, perhaps you've read how when divers go down to great depth, it takes them a long time to come back up. It took them 5 days to come back to the surface. They had to decompress for 5 days. That's how long it took to get equalized before they could come back and not suffer from the consequences of being down that deep for that long. But the childlike spirit, let's approach 2022 with that spirit. 2022 is an exploration. Find God in your way, whatever that way is. It's not for anyone else to tell you it's right or wrong. It's for you to know in your heart that what you are aspiring to belongs to you. It's not any farther away from you than you believe it to be. Let us live in that spirit, and 2022 will bring us deep, deep joy and peace. Namaste.